So in this segment, we're going to carry on talking about the Frost speech that he did fairly recently about the Northern Ireland Protocol. We spoke previously about where Frost talks about the origins of the protocol. In this one, we're going to talk about what went wrong in his opinion. Just a caveat with the point, obviously, that the EU officials have found his approach fairly honest. That he negotiated the protocol to get Brexit done and stay in power. That was the whole thing, to win power in that 2019 election. So he didn't really care about the protocol as such until it came into effect. So he says, clearly things did not work out like that, as you mentioned before. And here I turn to the second theme of my speech, where did it go wrong? I don't want to go through the detail of what happened in 2020 while we were in the transition period, not least because my focus at the time was on the mammoth task of delivering what became of the TCA rather than implementing the provisions of the protocol through the joint committee. So Frost had that 2020 seemed like a very busy year for him, because instead of focusing on the Northern Ireland Protocol to make it work in 2021, he had to deal with getting the TCA. That's why, Brexit kind of, the bandwidth that these ministers have is not a lot. Frost isn't the smartest guy around, and he had a lot to do in terms of his job. And yes, you can argue he accepted it and blah, 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 but this is more Boris Johnson and British government failing of not having someone separately to negotiate the trade agreement. He goes, the withdrawal agreement required a minister to be in charge, and the task was accordingly given to Michael Gove, who was not very good. First, it became quite clear that the EU had not absorbed either that we genuinely wanted a Canada-style free trade agreement rather than a high alignment future deal, or what we had determined on leaving the transition period at the end of 2020. So he's going to argue that. I think Barnier, from what I read earlier, Barnier always kind of guessed the UK wanted a Canada-style deal. So he might have wanted some sort of agreements on alignment or a certain level of standards. That's what has in the TCA, that the UK cannot backslide on the standards that we had at the time. So we cannot deregulate certain aspects of worker rights, etc., without facing problems with the TCA being suspended or parts of it. So I don't agree with what Frost is saying here entirely. He says, I don't think that they really realised we were serious on either point until the deadline to extend the transition period had passed in June. As a result, the first half of the year, both in my negotiation and in Michel Barnier's, was largely shadowboxing, and the time to work through detail got squeezed accordingly. So he's arguing that, once the deadline extension, the request had passed, that's when Barnier, in Frost's opinion, thought, okay, things are real now, we need to get this done. I don't think that's the case, to be honest with you. Secondly, once they did realise this, we saw the Northern Ireland Protocol start to be weaponised in the talks. That's not really true, is it? They didn't really weaponise it. Obviously, a free trade agreement was needed because for goods going to GB to NI, there would be tariffs placed, and then those tariffs would have to be... they would have to request a rebate on them, essentially, if there was no trade agreement. He goes, Northern Ireland Protocol became weaponised. It's not true. Said to shape the agreement, but to try to take away our no-deal option. But the thing is, right, he acknowledged in the first bit of his speech, right, there was always the possibility that there would be a no deal. And so he agreed to the Northern Ireland Protocol to get the withdrawal agreement, to get Brexit done and win an election. So his arguing here that the Northern Ireland Protocol is weaponised is absolute rubbish. He goes, they wanted to present us with a situation whereby if there was a no deal, the protocol's provisions for third country tariffs on goods moving to Northern Ireland would apply, and the at-risk provision would never be worked out reasonably. The thing is, right, the at-risk provisions has never really been worked out. This mainly for pretty much all goods going from GB to NI. The EU and the UK have never fully worked out what the UK wanted with regards to at-risk provisions. They did talk about trusted trader schemes, etc., but the EU put it in originally what would happen, what goods need to be checked originally in the Northern Ireland Protocol. So for the UK to argue the at-risk bit provisions, they were already agreed on, if that makes sense. And also the fact is arguing the Northern Ireland Protocol is weaponised is simply not the case. This is the reality of not getting a trade deal at the time. He's admitting himself that he didn't put in the provisions of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Maybe he didn't care for it that much because he always believed they would repeal it at some point. That's what is very stupid, in my opinion. He says, we faced various threats in the talks that Northern Ireland would be cut off, which Northern Ireland is cut off. You cannot deny that. It's cut off, but it's cut off by the Westminster government. He goes that we would not be able to move 1 kilo of butter from GB to NI, and that is that agri-food rules and standards might be used to ban some movements altogether, which is fine. The argument here that we would not be able to move 1 kilo of butter from GB to NI is nonsense, because they would be able to, but the problem is it wouldn't be economically viable because of the amount of the costs involved in it. Does that make sense? Because it'd be so expensive, because you've got customs checks, you've got vet checks, you've got SPS checks, you've got all of the checks that would happen for a product such as butter. So it wouldn't be viable. So his arguing here that that GB wouldn't be able to move things is rubbish, absolute rubbish. It wouldn't be economically viable, but that's what the Northern Ireland Protocol was. So it's absolute nonsense, this bit here, absolute nonsense. He goes, that is third, the background to the notwithstanding clause, the UK internal market bill leaked by our internal opponents in late August. I think that's nonsense as well. I think they leaked parts of the internal market bill, just like they leaked parts of the new bill that they were supposedly making about scrapping bits of the Northern Ireland Protocol in British law. Absolute nonsense. They did this on purpose. He goes, we acknowledge that these clauses would, if used, breach the provisions of the protocol. We thought it was a necessary evil to ensure the UK had the powers needed to make it clear that we would never allow tariffs within the UK's kind of single market or customs union, and to underline that the EU had to take seriously the no-deal outcome in the FTA talks. Evidently, the EU did take the no-deal outcome seriously. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had this conversation up here. He goes, to make it clear, we would never allow tariffs, blah, blah, blah. These UKIM provisions, internal market provisions, understandably cause fury on the EU side, which is what they were designed to do. He says, though they were always very careful not to let outrage get in the way of FTA talks, and rightly so, unless understandably among those UK parliamentarians who prioritise an EU relationship over the unity of the country, which isn't really true, because at the end of the day, those UK parliamentarians knew that the EU was our largest single trading partner. So obviously you don't want bad terms with your largest single trading partner, because otherwise you're not going to be trading much, are you? He goes, in the end, we did enough to get what we wanted, a Canada-style, fully zero tariff agreement, which removed us from any kind of EU jurisdiction, while respecting reasonable fair competition concerns. But, if we wanted to get away from the EU completely, why did we acknowledge fair competition concerns? Doesn't make sense, does it? Also, the fact that, Boris Johnson claimed in 2019 there would be no non-tariff barriers, but there were non-tariff barriers. So, more nonsense. There's this, together with the elimination of tariffs, meant that we were able to drop the notwithstanding clauses from the UK Iron Bill. I think they leaked this, right, to try and force something from the EU, which they didn't get. They wanted to make it look like they were doing something, because they got rid of the clauses anyways. He goes, though I must admit that if I had known then what I know now, I would have argued for them to be maintained, uncommenced, but capable of being reactivated if necessary, and if they were activated, it would either go to court very, very quickly, or the TCA would get suspended. That's why they were never kept in. Once again, we reached a point where we believed and hoped that normal service would be resumed with the EU, but he doesn't define really what normal service with the EU is. He goes, we knew the protocol and other aspects of the withdrawal agreement would be tricky, but that we believed that the trader support service, removing most day-to-day burdens of form filling, coupled with a more constructive EU relationship, more broadly would make the situation more manageable. The thing with a trusted trader scheme, I don't know how many countries would actually use them for a start. And also the fact that if you believed a trusted trader scheme would work, why didn't you argue for that in 2019? Why are you arguing for it now when you know it's far harder to change a formalised and implemented agreement than it is one that's in flux, that one that is being written? It doesn't make sense. During January 2021, it seemed that the protocol could be made to work. It was never going to be made to work. That's why he had to take unilateral actions. Because its provisions came to force, and although there were some short-run shortages in Northern Ireland supermarkets, there were a lot of shortages. There were a lot of shortages in Northern Ireland initially. They mainly disappeared quickly and were arguably no worse than the rest of the UK. It's not the bar you really want to jump, but that's mainly because I think they were importing goods from the EU and predominantly from Ireland. At the time, because a lot of UK exporters don't want to deal with Northern Ireland anymore because it's just the expense of paperwork and all the other stuff. So it's just comical that he's arguing this. He doesn't explain how the shortages were overcome. Because that came to an end on the 29th of January last year with the EU's ham-fisted triggering of Article 16. He said, "We had been told repeatedly, incorrectly, but repeatedly over the last 5 years that it was impossible to bring into play any new processes at the land border," which is true. And this is where he's going to argue about the Article 16 thing. He goes, "We've been told there could be no new restrictions on north-south movements. That is why we had the protocol." The EU turned around and said, in pandemic conditions that are already extremely fraught, and just hours after President Macron denounced the AZ vaccine as quasi-ineffective. Now, he's arguing that, Macron was angry at the AZ vaccine, but the EU changed the rules and blah blah blah. There's a reason why the AstraZeneca vaccine was not given to people below, I think it's the age of 30. There was a reason for that. He goes, "This passage of time dimmed the memories of how extraordinary the proposal was. The EU's rapid retreat from it, so triggering Article 16, when someone in the Commission said we could use Article 16 to stop vaccines going from Ireland to Northern Ireland, to keep them in the EU single market effectively, or keep them within the EU. That didn't happen. Someone proposed it and it was shut down very quickly. So to make this argument is just in bad faith, to be honest with you. He goes, the whole moral basis for the protocol had been destroyed in unionism's eyes. Not really, not at all. He goes, it had shown that the EU's interest came first. No, it didn't, because it showed you Ireland's interest came first. Because it was the Taoiseach who called someone in the Commission and said, "What are you doing? Sit down and shut up. Do not do this." So it wasn't in the EU's interest. If it was in the EU's interest, they would have done this. They would have triggered Article 16. They would have stopped the vaccines going into Northern Ireland from Ireland. And that would have been that. But that didn't happen, did it, Frost? Because it wasn't the EU's interest. It was in Ireland's interest to stop this. He goes, the situation has never recovered. That's not true. The situation would have recovered. You keep banging on about it, big man. He goes, unionist consent has been destroyed, but you never asked for unionist consent in the first place. Why are you making it a big deal now? As unionist politics have gone haywire, and the protocol is never going to be operable as envisioned. So his whole argument is the protocol could have worked, right? He goes, the protocol could have worked in January 2021, even though we know it's not true. But then he argues because the EU said they might trigger Article 16, it blew the whole thing apart. Absolute rubbish. The protocol is never going to work because the people who were meant to implement it, the British government, never wanted it to work. That's the top and bottom of it. That's the reality of the situation. He goes, it might have been better to point out the EU's vaccine proposals would have used a mechanism very much like those we had proposed for customs in autumn 2019, but we had been told they were impossible because you'd be putting in a de facto hard border with an island for certain goods. We should have said, fine, you have set a very low bar for the use of Article 16, noted, you have shown it is in fact possible to control goods going across the land border. But the thing is, had the EU done this, I think the IRA would have resorted to some sort of violence around the border checks. I think that could have been a very much a reality of the situation, because we will allow the UK standard goods to circulate in Northern Ireland and put in place arrangements to stop them getting into the single market. How would you stop them going from Northern Ireland to Ireland? I don't get it. You never explain that bit, do you? You've never explained how it's possible, because in fairness, the EU Commission never explained how they were going to stop vaccines going from Ireland to Northern Ireland. They never explained how they were going to do that. Just like Frost here has never explained how he's going to stop goods going from Northern Ireland to Ireland. Do you see what I'm saying? Is we would have had the moral high ground to act in circumstances where a challenge would have been very difficult. It's true, we would have had the moral high ground, but we don't, because we continuously did far worse than threaten to use Article 16. We used constant unilateral actions, constant saber rattling, and constantly arguing this isn't what we agreed on. The interpretation and implementation we kept arguing about, even though we knew that we were on thin ground. We got the Americans spoke to us about this. EU representatives spoke to us about this. I think other nation states even talked to us about this. Don't mess around in Northern Ireland. Don't do this again. Because it took an international effort, a real international effort, to get peace in Northern Ireland. Frost goes, that was to say the protocol was not workable, but without being able to effectively point at the EU for making it so, because that's what he wanted. He wanted to say the protocol won't work and it's the EU's fault, and he never got that. He never was given that kind of arrow, if that makes sense. Because we faced a storm of criticism as we first tried to place mitigations and then propose changes to the protocol. Our opponents rightly sensed we were on weak ground and we could be made to suffer it. How at this point could you be on weak ground? You had a stonking majority. stonking majority. How are you on weak ground at this point? This is what you've made for yourself. Because indeed, the EU took the opportunity to double down by responding to our low-key extensions of grace period. They weren't low-key. They weren't. And the EU did nothing. There was no legal action. There was nothing that happened. He goes, in areas such as pet passports and non-commercial parcels, by immediately beginning infraction proceedings, which would end at the Court of Justice. What happened was the UK kept threatening to suspend parts of the protocol and taking unilateral actions. The EU said, fine, we'll see you in court. But then the EU paused it, didn't they? Even when the UK took more unilateral action during the summer of 2020, was it 2021? I think it was. Even though the UK took more unilateral actions, the EU said, fine. You know, they didn't go to court or anything. I was surprised they didn't. I was surprised they paused legal action. But the simple fact is, if they wanted to go to the Court of Justice, it would have done. Frost doesn't mention this, though, does he? He doesn't mention the bit about the pausing of legal action. I wonder why. He goes, the EU has been able to refuse any renegotiation of the protocol because we agreed to it. You know, these are two sovereigns agreeing to an international agreement regarding Northern Ireland, regarding Brexit. You can't just go back and rewrite it. This isn't, the 1800s where you could make up agreements and then get rid of them because might equals right. You can't do that anymore. He says, while making minor concessions to keep the upper hand. What do you mean? Making minor concessions to keep the upper hand? They did what's in the interest of the people in Northern Ireland because they spoke to businesses. They spoke to people and said, what are the issues? Or what can we do to make your life easier? What are the tweaks we can make to the protocol? And they did that with medicines. They did that with meats and other things. It's ridiculous what he's saying. It is why we had to justify the use of Article 16. Just do it then. Do it. See what happens. See how fast it caves in on you. He goes, while facing a very serious counter threats from our friends in the EU if we do, because you don't have the legal standing to do it. If you did, it would go to arbitration or it would go to the courts. That's what would happen. And if you think you're in the right, do it then. But you're not. At least he won't do it. Why? Because he knows the consequences. They don't have the legal standing to do this. Even if it went to arbitration, the UK would lose. Because they have to explain how it's unforeseen circumstances. And, based on this article here from an ex-Stormont official, they've got no standing. But it's a ridiculous article, cherry picking certain aspects. What do we expect from Frost? He talks about the EU taking legal action and going to the Court of Justice when the simple fact is they paused legal action. He doesn't mention that. So again, Frost proves himself once again to be a dodgy actor. But anyways, look, we're going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. Genuinely interested to know what people's thoughts on these are. They're very long videos. I mean, this one's about 17 minutes, but the guy talks endlessly. I mean, this article is so long, this transcript. But we're going to do a what should happen now. In Frost's opinion, there's quite a bit left to talk about in another video. Then what I'll do is I'll piece this together and just kind of fuse it, if that makes sense. But like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you hopefully in part 3.